Let me just first thank MMF for inviting me to come here and speak. It's a great privilege, and it's been great to get to know some of you over the last week and some new people today as well. I think I'm going to follow this theme of not feeling massively qualified for standing up here, but it's great to see everybody learning from each other. So hopefully you'll learn some things from this, and we can understand a little bit better how to mobilize our content. So that's the title. I've been given the principles of mobilizing your content. And what I want to present is essentially a bit of a framework for you to go through as you consider the content that you've already got, maybe consider new content, and how we can mobilize that and use that in our ministry in this mobile context that we've been talking about. So the first step in this is to do your homework. If you were in Keith's session before lunch, this won't be new to you, and you'd have already done this section probably. But it's just really important to understand the context that we're in. We're obviously all using mobile devices. We're in context where mobile is around us, but we need to know exactly what that looks like. We need to first start by looking at our audience profile, maybe the demographics and some of the mobile behavior that's going on around them. Mobile can often have very unique and niche cultures where some people are just absorbed by texting or living on Facebook day by day. Other groups will just buzz in and out of it at different stages. So trying to understand exactly what the people that we want to reach are doing is really helpful. But we also need to understand what the local infrastructure is there. And that's quite a key one as we try and wrestle with, do we have cell data and lots of access to Wi-Fi like a more westernized country does, or is it very sporadic? Is it very slow? Is it very cost prohibitive? There was a great website Keith shared with us called whatisthecostofyoursite.com, something like that. But go and look at his resources. You can type in your website there and it will tell you how much the end user has to pay to use your website. It's a really key point to think about as we do some of our homework on this. And then finally, what the actual technology is available. What are your people groups using? Is it a smartphone with all the latest features? Is it a feature phone that can just about access the internet? Or is it just a dumb phone that's limited to text and calls? And then obviously looking at whether SD cards are appropriate with that. So really doing your homework, hopefully what that will give you is a good, clear yes or no as to whether to proceed. In this context, we're all here in mobile because we know it's the thing we need to be doing. So we're going to assume we've got a good yes here and move on to our second principle. Taking the best approach. Now, we don't just want to take a yes and then assume that, right, we're going to do mobile and we're going to do the mobile that I've got in my pocket and I'm going to make a really nice app. We need to take all of that data, all of that understanding, and make sure that we apply it in the right way. So we need to look at three different things. So firstly, are we going to be looking at a smartphone app that uses mobile data and we can then get people onto the Play Store or the App Store, download our content, and then keep updating that content over Wi-Fi. That might be suitable for you, but it might be that actually it's a feature phone and you've got an app, but it largely needs to be able to run offline, almost self-sustained if you like. But it may be that it's a website and it's simply just a matter of making a responsive website and therefore making sure Google will find it, as we heard earlier. But it may be, as we touched on, SD cards, and that great video is a brilliant example of SD card ministry and how we don't need to have smartphones, we don't need to have all this nice cell data coverage that we're used to in countries like Holland and where I'm from in the UK, but we can go around with distribution. But what that really does is once you've thought through all that, is it gives you what I call your distribution plan. And that's really going to affect the next few steps. So if your distribution plan is going through the Google Play Store, you're going to be thinking about, well, how do I get people there? How do I get people to see it? And it's going to be much more around advertising and marketing. You go to the other end of the spectrum, like we've seen in the video, if it's SD cards, you've got a logistical problem. So you need to factor this in as you look at your ministry, what resources you've got available, and what can be achieved both with the infrastructure and your limitations around you. So thirdly, we need to, hope the clicker works, there we go. Thirdly, we need to adapt our content. So we're talking at this stage about existing content. I'll touch on new content in a moment. But we need to make sure that our content fits the distribution plan and the environment in which we've just been looking at. So the first of those things might be to edit your media for better consumption on mobile. We might have a bit of cell coverage, but do we want our user to download an hour's worth of movie, the entire Jesus film or something like that? Or do we need to think maybe we should package this up into manageable chunks? Maybe we need to serialize it and break it down. Or maybe you've got some good written text, but actually written text on a 1.5-inch screen, that's quite a lot of clicking and scrolling to get through that. So maybe we need to just think about the end screen and the delivery mechanism and adapt and edit our content to suit that environment. We also need to reformat. I think there's a session a little bit later on that's going to touch on that a little bit more with Jay and Darcy, I think, as they look at what does it mean to have all these DVDs and audio and cassettes if some of your content's that old. How do we digitize that? How do we get that onto a mobile? I've yet to come across a mobile phone yet with a DVD drive. So we need to do something with that. And then also comes with that is the element of compression and what quality we want to put that in. And I just want to take a little sidestep from this to look at the idea of content and an interesting ratio that I call the novelty versus quality. So I've got this little graph here, which shows this inverse proportion between the novelty of your content and the quality. Now, by novelty, we can define that in a lot of different ways. It's basically what is new or unique or different about your specific piece of content. So it could be that it is the first piece of content in someone's heart language. That has a high novelty value. If they've never seen anything in their heart language, your novelty value is way up there. If they've seen loads of things, then the novelty value not so much. I always like to explain this with a good iPhone analogy. If you're a Mac fan, you'll probably also love following the rumors of new phones that are coming out. So I think we're on iPhone 7 in terms of rumors. So if I have the iPhone 7 under here and I get a little video of it, no one's going to care what the quality is because no one's seen it before. They just want to get any form of video about it. And as you get closer to September when they release them, you'll find that kind of thing happening, the kind of Chinese factory photo in dark lighting of the iPhone 7. As soon as that's released and Apple's done their nice big HD marketing campaign, my low quality screenshot of an iPhone 7 is not really going to be worth anything at all. Because the novelty value is gone, I now need to think about the quality and what's going to make my content more distinctive again. So that's just a little thing to think through when you're thinking about content. And it's also quite encouraging because it means you don't need to jump straight into, let's do an HD movie. You can just start with something really small. If it's different, if it's got some niche, then it should find some traction. And so that brings us back to compressing that content. And so you may need to compress it for fast download. It may need to be compressed so that it fits on the SD cards that you're distributing it with. So all of those things are just some aspects to consider as you adapt your content. And I think there'll be some other sessions that really unpack that a bit more later. But all of that considered, you should have some nice mobile-ready content. So the next one, get the design right. This is close to my heart. I'm a designer, really, and spend a lot of my time looking at user experience. So this would be where my main passion is, and there's probably a slight bent here towards smartphone apps, perhaps. But it's really important. The first thing to consider in terms of the design is what are the end objectives? I really appreciated the way Wayne Dye brought that emphasis on getting the traction to maintain, getting people to stick with your content, getting people to go beyond just making a decision and then disappearing, and continuing to engage them, and really focusing on what do we do after they've seen some content and made a response. So we need to think through, what are the end objectives? Are we just merely delivering content for content's sake and to have some nice statistics of views, or are we delivering content, as I'm sure we are, to have some real life-changing impact and see people come to Christ? So as we think about that, we can start to focus that into how we get the design right. And then the user experience is critical. I was going to have a slide in here of a horrendous user experience, but it's not quite in my nature to put something up that doesn't look good. But it's really important at this stage. Essentially, I think a little bit like we heard from Dave Watson, if you were here earlier, is what are the barriers that you're putting in to people accessing your content or hearing the gospel? And there's a recent statistic in a media and business websites that said 48% of people who had a bad experience on a website attributed it to the company not caring about them. So that's 48% of people who think that you don't care about the experience. You don't care about them because you've given them a bad experience. So the experience and how people can access your content is really key. It comes up in things like, how do they find your content? How do they search for different things? How do they consume your content? Have you put in a really, really high quality video in an area where there's very, very low bandwidth? You're going to frustrate your users with a terrible buffering experience and jumping video as they struggle to download it. Or maybe you've just got too many options going on the screen and they can't really get straight to what they want. You'll find that your users have a very low attention span and they'll quickly move on and find something else. So user experience is quite critical. And then, as I touched on earlier, are we doing more than just content delivery? So the tool that Crew shared with us earlier in the week about being able to create a campaign where you can watch a video and then directly after that video you can present a question with, I think there was half a dozen different options. And from those options that would lead you off in a different direction, maybe to some other video or so another track of content. Just thinking about what's next. We've delivered the content. What do we do now? So that should hopefully give you a great design and strategy, which you can then go off and build, whether that's a whole product or whether that's just getting your SD distribution planned out or anywhere in between. If you think through those things, that's where you should be at. So that leaves you with launching and evaluating. So this is perhaps the most important part, because you could create the most brilliant content, you could package it in the most appropriate, perfect way, but if the people you're trying to reach can't find it, can't access it, then what's the point? So if you're thinking mobile apps, then this might look like a marketing strategy. It might be, how do we do a campaign where people can find our content? Maybe we use Facebook or some other social media to draw people to an app download page. It may be that it's actually just boots on the ground that matter, and getting face-to-face with people, building relationships and talking to them, and then having the opportunity to hand over the SD card itself. And then once you've done that, are you ready to promote, but also to maintain? Again, this is a little bit more biased perhaps to apps that you might have out there, but you need to show a sense that this thing hasn't just been thrown out and forgotten. Particularly on a website, it's very easy to set up a blog these days, but 9 times out of 10, you'll go back a month later or a year later, and it's barely been updated at all. And that really impacts how people value and see the site, whether they want to come back again, whether they even trust the site if it's not been updated in a really long time. So are you ready to maintain? Also, if you are thinking mobile apps, be aware that every year, Android and iOS and others update their operating system. And if you've got users that are following some of those trends, or even if they just change phones from an older version to a slightly less older version, There's going to be differences and things that are going to affect the delivery of your content. And then the beauty really of mobile, and one of the things I really love about it, is for the first time we have an amazing ability to evaluate and measure exactly what's going on. In fact, with mobile itself, we probably have far too many metrics to track and to follow. But what we can do is look at what's working and what's not. How far are people getting through our video before they give up? What do they go to after they've just read this piece of content or listened to this bit of audio? Where do they get it from? Where do they pass it on to? Who do they share it with? We can have all sorts of numbers and metrics. The importance here is to understand what are the vital ones for your ministry and your context, and to understand which ones are worth measuring so that they can give you the best impact. And the reason I say that is because after you've been through those items, you've got your successful campaign, is that this is all about iterating. And this means that you can start small. Don't be afraid to start small with something, to test an idea out, get it out there, get some feedback, and then go back around the loop of these different things. Don't be afraid to fail either. Sometimes the best ideas come from just taking big risks, from things that we didn't hear necessarily as feedback, but for some reason they just took off and became a great success. But using this process, we can go back to any of these stages, whether it's going back to our homework and checking, did we really understand the environment we're working in? Did we really use the best distribution plan? Or did we adapt our content in the right way? Maybe we need to make those 10-minute chunks into 3-minute chunks instead. All of that allows you to just continually go back and refine for the end goal of essentially greater effectiveness and greater relevance. Finally, I just want to finish, my time's nearly up, with a quick example. Spotlight is a ministry that has produced 15-minute radio programs in what's called specialized English. They use a limited 1,500-word vocabulary, and they use a slow speed, about 50 words a minute. They distribute their programs over FM, typically, about 4 or 5 different shows a week. And they came to us and spoke to us about how do we use mobile, how do we get this out to more people beyond the FM towers, and how do we reach more areas of the world. So this was the product we came up with. It allows you to download or stream the program, depending on what bandwidth you've got available. It allows you to choose between high-quality audio and low-quality audio, but it also allows you, as you can see on the main screen there, to actually follow the script and read through as you're listening to the program, to better improve your English. So that's just a small example. If you want to know more about that one, then do come and talk to me. My time is up. So that is how to mobilize your content. Thank you very much.